Welcome to Real Talk Inside the Business of Entertainment, where we talk about the current state and future of the entertainment industry with the people who power it. I'm Anne Kennedy McGuire, an entertainment partner here at Loeb Loeb. Today, I'm very excited to speak with my fellow colleague and partner, Marc Chamlin. He is the chair of our literary publishing practice group. To kick us off, Marc, tell us about your practice and what you're doing here at Loeb.
As you know, Anne, I'm a generalist, so I chair the television group and I also chair the literary publishing. And I've always approached being an entertainment lawyer as a generalist. And I started at a time, I'm not going to indicate exactly, but it was several decades ago when you could do everything and the industry was small and it grew large. And so I was one of those lucky attorneys who was able to be involved with transactions across television, film, publishing, corporate, litigation, and that's the nature of my practice today. What's interesting about it and why I chair the literary publishing practice here is that I've always had a strong interest in books and reading myself as a personal avocation, and that as a practice was really not done by many attorneys. It was always kind of a side thing, and it's a unique practice because the nature of the contracts related to publishing are really quite different than television or film. And you really have to understand the book business and you have to understand the uniqueness of the contracts in the book industry. And so I started doing that a long time ago. And when I started doing it, I was kind of winging my own way. Actually, one of the first books that I worked on as an associate was a memoir by the infamous Klaus von Bülow. And then I started doing a variety of books that came out of television, people that I represented. And then it just spread to a normal overall practice. And then we began to do it among other attorneys here in the firm. And now we probably have the largest literary publishing practice at this point. And it's representing not only authors, but representing literary agents, literary agencies, individual publishing companies, imprints, celebrities who do books, executives in the publishing industry who head up their companies, and technology companies that are adjacent to books. So it's a really broad practice, and we tend to channel in from other parts of the firm, as you know, whether it's technology or privacy or intellectual property. Those matters always cut across the board in terms of what we do when we're looking at manuscripts, when we're discussing subject matter.
That's a great overview. So as the publishing space evolves, how are these models changing? Because you were talking about developing into this practice, but there's also a lot of different changes in the entertainment industry. So how are those changing the business and legal dynamics for both authors and publishers?
It used to be that there was only one, I'll call it model, and it was a publishing company would pay in advance and pay a royalty. And the royalties would vary depending upon the nature of the distribution, whether it was in hardcover, soft cover, large print, overseas, foreign translation. And that has evolved quite a bit. There are obviously different modes of exploitation. We now have audiobooks when we never had audiobooks before. We now have electronic books or eBooks like a Kindle. So the publishing industry has learned to accommodate those additional pathways and the royalty structures for that. We've also seen the growth of a different type of model, which is a rev share model that different publishing houses use in different ways. And there's a lot of negotiation that comes to the discussion of the rev share model. But essentially, it is a sharing of the profits on the book after the deduction and recoupment of all out-of-pocket costs and certain fees, but very transparent and very specific in terms of what is deducted. But you become a true partner with the publishing house. This is not available to anybody. It's not a choice issue. Most publishing houses will only do this with high-level authors. And some publishing houses have rules that are very strict, which is if we're going to do a rev share model with you, that we are not going to pay in advance because you're our partner. You're asking to share in our bottom line. Other publishing houses will do advances against the author's share of publishing, kind of a real hybrid between royalty and rev share. There also is self-publishing now, which is something that did not exist 20 years ago. And there are real successes uh, in publishing, and we can talk about that in greater detail, where books are self-published and become extremely successful and then get published by a major house, and they have more leverage at that point because they've already sold 150,000 books on there. And we can talk about how those books get marketed and what's done to do that. And lastly, there is, I would call a hybrid publishing, and I won't call it a model, just kind of a type of company, such as Authors Equity. And that is a company founded by Madeline McIntosh, who was the president of Penguin Random House. And that is a publishing company with a distribution relationship with a major publishing house. But what it does very differently is that it does a rev share model, and a lucrative rev share model with the author, but it really provides a real kind of bespoke approach to working with a limited set of authors who they bring in expert people, if not on their own staff, to work with the particular author. And it's similar to an imprint, but much different than an imprint, because most imprints that you know of are an imprint that a celebrity may have with an existing publisher, where he or she brings another author into the mix, and that author makes their own deal with the publisher, and the celebrity just shares in the bottom line profits of the books, but he uses his or her influence and relationship to bring in these books. The Authors Equity is quite a different thing. Author is a standalone publisher that works with the author and acts like a real publishing house, but with a much more tailored approach to authors and a much more transparent model of sharing the profits on books. So I think the models have changed quite a bit. And I also think that it evidences the fact that the death of the publishing industry that people were certain was going to happen 10 years ago has not, in fact, happened at all. And that books, if anything, are thriving today. And they're thriving because people consume them in different ways. They consume them by print, they consume them by audiobooks, they consume them by eBooks, and combinations. I look at myself as an example. I probably read 70% of the books I consume by audio and 30% by print. And most of those same books, I do both, depending upon where I am, where I'm located, what I'm doing. And it allows me to consume the book in a much more rapid pace. I think I'm a typical example of people who adore books and love the technology and believe that it allows you to consume at different parts of the day, whether you're in the car, whether you're walking, whether you're relaxing at home. And I think also people consume books in different ways. I think some people are very visually oriented and some people are more auditory. And I know people who said, I recall better when I'm actually reading it. And I know others who say, no, I retain a lot more when I'm listening to a book because I don't have to worry about my eyes getting tired. It goes into my brain and I'm processing it and I have to think about it and I retain it better. So my point is the death of the industry was greatly exaggerated. And then there also is another element too that I should mention. There are now custom books that are being made by companies that you might think of as a vanity coffee table book, but it could be done by a hotel or a retailer or a luxury goods company that wants to make its book available at events, online, for free, in hotel rooms. And you're seeing these kinds of travel books and luxury goods books being made and commissioned by great authors who really have a sense of style. And it's a business that really just did not exist 25 years ago. So I think this is the golden age of books. That's my personal view.
I'm glad you mentioned audiobooks. As you know, I'm an avid audiobook reader. I read probably 100 books a year, but I would say it's about 95% audiobooks. So it's very much audiobook heavy. Something that is near and dear to my heart, but also everyone is talking about is AI in audiobook production and in these immersive audio formats. And I know the publishing industry has been sort of on the forefront of the discussions about and battles with AI models and AI platforms, but how are authors and publishers balancing those opportunities with, legitimate concerns about authenticity and rights and creative control? What have you been seeing in that space?
Well, I think you got to look at AI in kind of two different buckets. The AI bucket of where the publishers don't like the idea of AI, a platform, scooping up all of their books and using them to teach their learning models. That I get completely, and getting no value for that. I agree that you've got to be paid for doing that. And I know if you go on AI and you say, if I say, summarize the first chapter of Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, it'll summarize it. It won't give me a quote from the book. I find that to be like a cliff note, and I found it to be helpful. Now, clearly, they've had to take the book to be able to do that, and that has to be licensed. That, to me, is a straightforward copyright discussion, and the publishers and authors should be compensated that. The other side of it is the production issue of AI. I would start with just the general, and again, these are my personal views. I don't look at AI as replacing an author who writes a book that is personal. AI is not sentient. It is fact-oriented, in my view. It is conversational, and it is cheerleading, and it is warm, but it is not real. It doesn't feel like a real person's memoir. Now, maybe someday that would be possible. I find that a well-written book that has emotion is written in a different way. It has rhythm, it has pauses, it uses punctuation to talk, just like I am speaking now with a bit of pausing. If I was writing that, you would see ... you'd hear a voice. That's not an easily done thing. That comes from a human who is thinking about how she or he wants to express themselves. So I don't have the concerns about AI replacing best-selling authors. Do I think AI can do a technical handbook of some kind? Absolutely, of course. And that's what they should be used for. In terms of the control issue, again, I believe that authors will continue to be in control of their work. I don't think AI will replace it. I think AI will help with editing in some ways. And I think that'll be a tool for authors to use. But I think at the end of the day, they're still, even if they use it as a tool, they're not going, an author will not let the editing process take away the soul of what's written. Because I think very clearly when you read a sentence that has just been reconstructed and looks perfect is not the way someone necessarily talks or speaks or relates a story, because we're imperfect in how we talk about things. And books that have soul and feeling and reflection, by definition, are imperfect. So I, for one, don't have an issue or a concern about AI.
Have you seen any use of AI in audiobook narrators to do the voice for them rather than, hiring a voice actor?
I've seen it really in the context of articles, not books. It's a kind of a sterile sounding version, but every audiobook that I have listened to has always been an author. And I think that's part of the joy of audiobooks, is that you become fans of certain readers who you think are really good. And if you go on to Audible, you can actually search for other books spoken by that same reader, and which is a wonderful thing. I do have personal views of when a reader is not good, it is a turnoff to the book, and you can't finish it. And that has happened a few times, and I've stopped listening to the audiobook and just simply read the book, and it was much better because I can picture the voice of the individual. If it's like a memoir, for example, I can picture the voice of the individual talking. But when I hear the audiobook read by a person who doesn't sound like that individual or does other voices often, doesn't do them well, it's a really bad experience. But the really good audiobook authors have wonderful voices, and they know what their limits are and they know what they're good at. And they make a decision how to do the voice of someone that's of a different gender, for example. If you're a male doing a female voice or a female doing a male voice in a book where there are multiple voices, you have to make certain decisions about how you do that. And I think it is just one of those things that if you look at any reviews of audiobooks, you will see people bitterly complain when they think the audio reading. As a matter of fact, you rate it on the quality of the book and the quality of the performance. If you go onto Audible's website, and I've seen plenty of books, a great book, lousy performance. So I believe that world is going to continue to be a great place for great readers. And I think people love hearing a great voice. And it's interesting because technology today, 11 Labs, for example, has created a technology which allows voices of certain celebrities so that you could listen to a book read in the voice of that particular actor. And that, I think, portends for the future. Imagine if in the future you wanted to hear a classic novel read by Glenn Close, and she had licensed her voice to be used based upon, obviously, the voices that are out there that can be learned. So I see a potential future for that. And I don't think it becomes the industry, but I think it's an interesting notion that we can listen to audiobooks by well-known voices that are familiar and beloved. So I do see that as a future feature that we will see more often than we do right now.
So something you hit on earlier was sort of a rise in ways to market books that have been different or weren't available before. I follow a lot of folks on Book Talk, or the Instagram version of this, or other social media channels. And I've seen those play a huge role in people finding books and in, like you were talking about, self-publishing. But that seems like a really big departure from the traditional role of an author sort of hold up and letting the publisher do all the marketing. So what have you seen on that side?
Yeah, this has completely evolved into the better. I mean, it used to be that an author, if he or she was at a high enough stature, went on a book tour. That was your marketing, and that was it. You'd be in 7 cities, and that's what you would do. Then maybe you'd go on a couple morning shows, and maybe there'd be an article, in Vanity Fair or something else, or New York Magazine. It wasn't a particularly efficient way of doing it. And you would have the publishers all vying to get space on the front tables at Barnes and Noble and paying for it. And so it was a very inefficient model. It was a model that really didn't reflect, the wider interest of what these books could garner. And so what you have today is a really great ecosystem. Book Talk is a fantastic ecosystem where the average reader just says, I love this book, and talks about it. And that has been a boon for backlists of books. It has helped backlists for publishers because a person begins to talk about the book and why she likes it, and people then begin to follow it and try it and buy it. And so social media has become an incredible vehicle for promoting, and is really not that the book tour has totally disappeared, but it's really much less important. And book publishers are happy not to spend money on a book tour. They would rather see it go into marketing to the wider audience. There are more people that are going to show up watching it on Book Talk than they are in a bookstore. Plus, you have book clubs. Book clubs today didn't exist. I mean, obviously, Oprah Winfrey's book club is the most successful of all the book clubs, and she does it because she loves and adores books. She is an incredible reader and has to me been the most important factor in the book community in the modern age, because she adores books and she reads them and she recommends them, and she has no benefit from that. She simply endorses them, makes them part of her book club, interviews often the author, and the author benefits from that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But it's all about reading. And she's not the only one. We all know that there are many different book clubs by other well-known people. And there are book clubs that are oriented towards uh, organizations that have book clubs. You know, an AARP could have a book club. You can have so many different types of book clubs that just find common-minded people who like those books. And community is really another thing that kind of leads you into the notion of self-publishing. Well, you can self-publish your book, but how does it get known? That's why you have social media. But then you have the phenomena of something like the book by Alan Levy called Theo the Golden, which they really had like a zero marketing campaign. It was a grassroots self-published book, and it got word of mouth to uh, a lot of faith-based circles, independent bookstores, you know, church libraries, local communities, that type of thing. And he sold, I believe the number is 170,000 books. And that book ended up going, after being self-published, being in demand by every major publishing house who wanted to buy it. And even though it had already been published already, it had 170,000 copies sold. Then I think they made a deal with Simon & Schuster, I believe. And they had soaring sales from it. So the author became successful. Now, you say, is that a model? I mean, the answer is sure. Will it happen again? Can you always do it that way? I think it depends upon the book. But again, that did not exist before the internet, before social media, before communities. It did not exist. And that's the wonderful thing about that. And I think it makes us realize that there are more platforms, more books, and people can read and listen in different ways. So I do think the ability to market and spread the word about a book is in a place that's never been before. And in fact, to come full circle on this, Barnes and Noble, it's actually viewed very much like the independent bookstores. And why is that? Because Barnes and Noble's policy, my understanding of it, is that you no longer as a publisher can buy your way or pay to play onto the front table. And that each Barnes and Noble store, the manager of that store makes the decision based upon her or his community, what is the right books to be presenting on the front table and featured in the window. And as a result of that, Barnes and Noble closed some stores and now is opening new stores as a result, which is an incredible turnaround. And it's essentially become a local community store, yes, with greater capacity, but it's not threatening independent bookstores because essentially they're adapting the independent bookstore model of being clear about what kind of choices they make for the books that they have and being much more curated. So it's just a fascinating development and evolution of how books are sold.
Well, Marc, that's a great segue because I know last year we had someone from Barnes and Noble at our literary and business conference that we hosted, and we just had one this past May. So tell us a little bit about that.
On May 20th, we had our second annual Literary Business and Law Conference at Loeb Loeb. It was very well attended. It is by invitation only, and it is designed for literary agents, executives at publishing houses, also executives at technology companies, and lawyers in-house at various publishers and technology companies. And we covered three topics. One was the business of audiobooks, and we had a panel of 4 people from Random House, 11 Labs, Audible. We then did a second panel involving major legal issues for book publishing, where we had representatives from Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, and HarperCollins. And then the last panel that we had was a publisher's perspective on the book industry, past and present, which I moderated. And I had 2 guests. One was Madeline McIntosh, who is the CEO and publisher of Authors Equity, which I mentioned earlier in the podcast. She's the former president and CEO of Penguin Random House, and Bob Miller, who is the former president of Hyperion Books and Flatiron Books. It was a great set of panels and something we're going to continue doing because we think there's a demand and a need for a discussion of both business and law and how they intersect.
Yes, absolutely. A great event every year. We love it. Well, thank you for joining us. That's a wrap on this episode of Real Talk Inside the Business of Entertainment. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll be back with more behind the scenes insights and candid conversations with the people shaping the industry. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more. Until next time, thanks for listening.